Goeiedag, mijn naam is Evan, ik ben immigratieprocureur hier in Amerika. En ik wil je helpen om immigratiewet te verstaan. Now, today, on to the Afrikaner's next biggest fear concerning the refugee program. What are the repercussions of the midterm election here in the United States on the Afrikaner refugee program? And the answer is absolutely none. Now, again, there's an asterisk that you always have to know. Anything can happen. There's always loopholes, backdoors, this sort of thing. The unexpected can always be expected to happen. But today I want to give you a brief and quick civics lesson so you can understand why on its face, I, as a proponent, as a supporter of the Afrikaner refugee program, and as a supporter of giving all Afrikaners here in the United States asylum grants, why I don't believe the midterm election will have any impact on the Afrikaner refugee program. So to really make this make sense, when we talk about the midterm elections, we're speaking of the legislative branch of government, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And you have to understand that in the United States system of government, which is very similar to the regering in South Africa, but just to be clear, our three branches of government have a separation of powers. Each has their sphere in which they occupy power, and there is little to no rollover for the other branches. So one branch operates exclusively in its sphere. However, it does have ways to check the power of the other two branches to keep them from getting powers they were never meant to have or getting out of control, things like that. So the legislative branch creates the laws. It also, in the House of Representatives, controls the purse strings of the government. That's the only area where it may have an impact on the Afrikaner refugee program, but the broad answer sweepingly is no, and I'll explain why. The executive branch enforces said laws, and through executive departments carries out the will of the executive and how they want to enforce those laws. So, as I've told you before, immigration and everything that falls under immigration, such as refugee programs, USCIS, the immigration courts, the Executive Office of Immigration Review, the Board of Immigration Appeals, DHS, all of those organizations, the Secretary of State, the State Department, that operate in that sphere, operate at the will of the President of the United States. And the legislative branch has given very broad deference to the executive to create departments like USCIS and other executive departments that not only carry out the law made by the legislature, but also through their own administrations create codes and acts and things like that. For example, if this helps it make sense to you, the Environmental Protection Agency was created, and it's an executive branch given permission by the legislature. And by the way, this is like a mile wide and inch deep basic stuff. I'm not getting too far into it. But they also make, in effect, laws that have to be followed dealing with the environment and how it's going to be carried out. Same thing with, for example, USCIS. The president is given great, broad, sweeping immigration powers to create a refugee program, say how that program is going to be carried out, right? To follow the laws adopted by the United States in what a refugee program is required, all the elements that I've given you before. And if the legislature changes, that doesn't change President Trump's desire or will or ability to continue the Afrikaner refugee program. The only thing that it could possibly do is if the midterm elections really went in favor of the left, is they could influence the budget that the executive would have to carry out such a program. But remember, we've talked about this in the past, USCIS continued to operate during the government shutdown. Why? Because their budget is supplied primarily by fees that are collected from filings and other things with the USCIS. So they are insulated from any sort of budget issue. Now, the other groups, such as the screening groups, whether that's Church World Services, whether that's Amerikaners, or any other of the contract groups that fall under that umbrella, we talked about this with the shutdown. Their budget was already solidified prior to, and the budget was dispersed prior to the whole budget debacle and issue. So it didn't impact them then. Could it impact them in the future? Could the midterm elections bring in a new legislature that controls the budget, that controls the purse strings, and say, cut all funding to it? Sure. Are they going to? No. I'm really, that's why I said from the beginning that this is really, I love the term a nothing burger. I think you're worrying yourselves about nothing. Could they do something? Sure, of course they could. But the midterm elections are not going to see the overturning of of a majority of seats in the legislative branch. You're not going to have a Democrat or a leftist supermajority. That's just not simply going to happen. So simply the balance of power shifting to the left, if it were to, wouldn't be enough for them to carry out all of their agendas. And even if they did, you have to remember checks and balances. If anything was passed, the president could always veto said thing. It then has to go back to the legislative branch and pass both houses of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, with a 2/3 majority vote to overturn a veto. So that's very difficult to do with only a basic majority. So you also have to remember, when it comes to the budget, do you really think, and just being honest here, do you really think that the left is going to be willing to shut down the entire government by not passing a budget that includes money for the Afrikaner refugee program solely because of the Afrikaner refugee program? Right, that would be the only way that its budget would be cut, is if the left was so hard set that they refused to allocate any money in a continuing resolution. Because remember, we don't actually pass a budget, we just kick the can down the road. But that they would refuse to allocate any money to USCIS, to all the refugee programs, to all of the contractors for it. I can't see that happening. I can't see the government willing for another shutdown for that one issue. Plenty of other issues they're willing to die on that hill for, but I don't see this. Could it happen? Sure, of course. But let's be realistic here. I'm just telling you from a mile wide, inch deep sort of civics lesson here. The executive really controls these programs. And yes, the only thing that the legislative branch could do is cut the funding for it. But again, they would have to battle that out on the floor of the House of Representatives, which controls the budget of the United States. So that's just a battle that I don't see them winning, or even having the political capital to fight with everything else going on. And even then, as long as the money got to the contractors, as it did during the first government shutdown, they will continue to operate till that money runs out. So the midterms, in theory, could impact a refugee program. In practice, this falls under Trump's administration, the executive. Just leave it at that for now. If anything changes, I'll give you my analysis on this channel. But as a professor that teaches constitutional law and just is obsessed with this stuff and watches this, I do not see any indication or any possibility for the midterm election to have any impact on the Afrikaner refugee program. The executive controls it. USCIS is funded by fees. The only issue is that budget with, contracting groups and things like that. But again, I wouldn't stress about it, at least not right now. And again, you're also talking about something that hasn't happened yet. So let's see what happens with the midterm election. So that's that. I just want to throw that out there. But, keep posting your questions. Again, I'm not going to answer questions that I can't answer. That should be directed to the government or the contracting agencies for the United States government. But I'm trying my best. Be on the lookout for a video on Monday. I want to discuss a few other things, and I think it'll be interesting and helpful for y'all. So as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you for the next video.